In this video, you're going to see how to create smoke. I've drawn 3 different shapes for you that we're going to manipulate individually in order to create the illusion of smoke. We'll start by using a filter. Now, Photoshop has hundreds of effects that you can apply using filters. And filters are made available through the application Photoshop through something called plugins. Plugins extend the functionality of Photoshop. What we've got is the standard group of plugins that ship with Photoshop CS6. However, there are third-party products, companies that have written software programs that run within Photoshop and give you additional menu items. You'll see that your list is longer if you've purchased something like that. For example, there is one that lets you do more advanced masking more easily. Just some of the things that are available from third-party vendors that let you do more with Photoshop, called plugins. Let's start with a very popular effect, Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, which is really a random blur. And the dial may be low to start, but we're going to go somewhere around 40 or higher. You can do any number you'd like, or different numbers on each shape. I'll click OK, and you'll notice I've created in this document a folder or layer group called raster shapes. The original vectors, what I drew with the pen tool, are stored in here for you too if you'd like to play or experiment with manipulating the shapes before you blur them. But on each layer, each shape, I'm going to click once and just repeat the last Gaussian blur filter. Whenever you run a filter, under the filter menu, the last thing you did pops up there. And so I can just repeat it instead of going all the way to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. If I want more blur on this shape, I can go back to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and it applies another 40 to it. I'll click OK, and now we're ready to bend it in order to make it look more like smoke. So I'll use Filter and Liquify. Liquify is used for a lot more than just bending to create this smoke effect. In fact, I call it the liposuction tool because it does an excellent job of skinnying arms or making noses smaller, just tuning up the human body. In this case, we're going to be on the default of forward warp tool. And Liquify has gotten radically faster in CS6. So if you used it in earlier versions, you should notice a significant performance increase. I'm going to dial my brush size up, and it used to have a limit of 1500 pixels. In fact, now you'll notice it goes all the way to 15,000 pixels. But we really only need something between 300 and 500, about the size of the shape that you want to stretch. And it may be hard to tell what's going on, so if you turn on advanced mode, you could see that I could see the backdrop or the background layer. And I can dial the opacity up to see all of my shapes. Finally, I can choose which layer I'm manipulating here. I'll start with shape 1. Or I can view all layers. I find that the easiest way to work. So as I click and drag, you'll notice that it's bending the smoke. Now, if I only want to affect one layer at a time, I'll choose just wave 1. And I'll manipulate simply this one. And I'll just do some curls here to create the illusion of smoke. I also want to keep the smoke going off the stage, and I'll click OK. There we have it. I'll click on Wave 2, choose Filter, Liquify. Make sure I'm on the Wave 2, and there we go. Now I could stretch this and curl it to create the illusion of smoke. Feel free to play here. And I'll sweep this back up so it stays off the canvas. And you could skinny it up by moving right or left. I think I'm happy with that. I'll click OK. Nice other swirl. Then I'll click on Wave, or pardon me, Shape 1, and then Filter, Liquefy. Make sure I'm using Shape 1, and now drag. In this case, it may be difficult to see, so I could turn off Show Backdrop and focus just on that shape. So you decide whether you find that backdrop helpful or if it's more of a hindrance, just turn it off. And you could undo Command-Z or Control-Z if you don't like where the effect is gone. And click OK. And there we have it, 3 intersecting pieces of smoke. Sometimes I'll also come back and do Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur again after I've run the smoke. It makes it nice and soft. I mean, after I've run the Liquefy on the effect to create the smoke. There we go. A little bit softer. And you could do this many times. Filter, Liquefy, and come back and swirl. Okay, it moved it a little off center, but I could move the entire layer because I'm on the Move tool, and now it's fine. So now we're ready for the next step. I'm going to create a color for all of these. So I'm going to click on the Layer Group Raster Shapes and make a new adjustment layer. In the adjustment layer, I will use Hue and Saturation to do a wash of color over the smoke. When I click Colorize, there I get an effect that applies to everything. I'll collapse Hue and Saturation, and now I want some texture. So I'm going to click on the background layer because any new layer that I build goes above the layer I'm on. I'll choose Layer, New Layer, and call it Clouds. I'll click OK. And now I'll choose Filter, Render, Clouds. If you have a sky blue and white, this actually does an excellent job of making up clouds in a flat photo. But in this case, when I did the Filter, Render, Clouds, it just gave me this very interesting texture to the smoke. So it looks like there's a puff or cloud behind it, and I could simply lighten the opacity or how solid that is to make it a more subtle effect. 2 last things to finish. I'm going to use a layer style. I always remember FX for effects, called Gradient Overlay. So at the bottom of my Layers panel on the Clouds layer, I'm choosing Gradient Overlay, and it goes from light to dark blending. I can click reverse and go from dark to light. Now when this is done, I'll also dial down the opacity, and it kind of makes the smoke thickest where it would be rising from the bottom and gets softer up towards the top. I'll click OK, and I'm almost done with this. I can lighten the opacity more if I want that smoke to be ever softer, and I can keep liquefying if I want to play with it. But my final step, I'll turn on my logo that says Design and Innovation by clicking the eye icon, and there I've created the illusion of smoke. You can bend this in all sorts of directions to create really interesting effects. And if you want to keep playing, you click on a layer, choose Filter, Liquefy, and keep manipulating that smoke. And click OK. And with each manipulation, you get something more interesting. Filter, Liquefy, and play. Click OK. I aim for a swirling pattern. Click, Filter, Liquefy, and play. every time I run this, I get a different result. And the more time you spend with it, the better you'll get at this effect. So try this step by step on your own. We've used the plugins Gaussian Blur, Liquify, and Filter Render Clouds. We've used the layer effects of a gradient overlay and mixing opacities.